Every place you dive in is going to be a little bit different, and each time is going to be different. So it's always just, what are you going to see this time? What's going to happen now? You never know. You could find something brand new, incredible, newly discovered on any dive.
This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Podker. Since 1964, Alvin, a human-occupied submersible and part of the U.S. academic research fleet, has allowed generations of scientists to explore the world's oceans. Operated by the National Deep Submergence Facility at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, primarily funded by NSF, along with the Office of Naval Research and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Continual innovation and regular upgrades put Alvin at the forefront of expeditionary research, allowing access to 99% of the world's seafloor, depths of approximately 4 miles, and up to 12 hours in duration. Alvin played a role in recovering a lost hydrogen bomb in the 60s, discovering hydrothermal vents in the 70s, exploring the wreck of the RMS Titanic in the 80s, and understanding oil spill impacts and previously unknown deep-sea coral reefs in recent years. We are joined by Kaitlyn Beardshear, electrical engineer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and one of Alvin's pilots. Kaitlyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to start with your interest in engineering. Were you always curious about how things work?
In a way, I suppose I was. As a kid, I definitely remember taking a lot of things apart because I wanted to see what was inside them. I just always wanted to know what's inside the box.
How did that interest get you into robotics and ROVs and this kind of work?
It was a slow process. I knew I wanted to learn how things work, but I didn't really quite know what specifically held my interest. So I joined general engineering, just kind of try it out, see how things go. And from there, I just sort of got tunneled into learning more about the electrical side, learning more about software, circuitry, and just electronics in general. And I really enjoyed doing that. So going into robotics really worked out for me.
Was there a specific part about the way electronics work that kind of stuck with you?
Can't think of something specific, but it was kind of given do you want to do more mechanically minded things or more electrical software? And mechanical was interesting. Learning how things move is cool, but I was more interested in the electrical side of that, of how does it move it in terms of control aspects?
Because my brain was thinking, did you get into the wiring part of it, or did you get into how to make the wiring work?
I guess into the wiring, because it was okay, you can see it, and now you're just telling it how to do it. You're just oh, you got this little piece that goes over here, and it tells this part to do this, and I really liked doing that part.
So moving into your current work, what is Alvin?
So Alvin is a deep submergence vehicle. It goes down to 6,500 meters, and we do oceanographic research. And the type we do depends on the science group that's with us at the time. We can get multidisciplinary cruises, or sometimes one we just had was just focused on geology. They just wanted rock samples. So we were just doing that. But we've also been on cruises where there's all sorts of different scientists, and this one wants rocks, and this one wants water, and this one wants animals, and everyone wants everything. And so every cruise is a little bit different with what you're going for in terms of the science.
How did you get connected with the Alvin Group? What brought you from an interest in electronics to working with these submarines and exploring the world?
I sort of fell into it. I was pursuing ROVs, and I was applying to so many internships. I wanted to get out at sea so badly. And the MATE program, the Marine Advanced Technology Education Program, they connected me to the Alvin Group, because that is their philosophy, is bringing the technology to people. So they helped with connecting me to the Alvin Group and getting me out to sea. And from there, I just never left. I stuck with the group the whole time.
Were you always interested in the ocean?
Absolutely. I grew up next to the ocean, and for me, it's hard to imagine being further away from it. Sometimes you just look around and go, where's the water? Isn't there supposed to be water here? I don't know how people grow up inland away from the ocean.
Right. The relationship with it becomes very different when you're in more of a beach community, for sure.
Yeah.
I think your first role there was as a swimmer. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a swimmer on the Alvin team?
Yeah. So the swimmer is one of the first roles you get trained in for the launch and recovery process. And it's a really important part. The swimmers actually go with the sub and they are putting lines on or taking them off, depending on if it's a launch or recovery. And so their job is the last safety checks before the sub can dive. They're the ones checking in with the pilot, making sure it's completely free of the ship and ready to go. And then on recovery, they're making sure that everything is safe and secure so we can get the sub back on it. So it's a really important part, and you get trained on it early on. And it can be fun because you are in the water and you get to go in the water with the sub, it's a different experience to see that thing in the water, even as a swimmer, because you see it on land and you're just like this big, bulky hunk of machinery. But then once it's in the water and it's moving around, it's a different experience to see it. And you're just like, you take a moment to be like, this is so cool. And then you get back into your job and you're like, okay, I got to pay attention. You're in the water. There's also the hazards of being in the water there's weather, there's waves, there are sharks, and every other thing that comes along with being in the water.
So what's the path from working as a swimmer to becoming a pilot?
So you go from swimmer. The next step up is the A-frame operator. So that's the person who's actually operating the giant A-frame that lifts the sub in and out of the water. From there, you go to the launch coordinator. That's the person who's the single point control for each launch and recovery. They're the one calling the shots. And then the last step before the pilot program is surface controller. So that's the person who maintains the communications with the sub, does all the tracking and navigation, and completes all the records for each dive. So you go up through each level, learning a different position in part of the sequence. And then once you get up to the service controller, then you're accepted into the pilot training program. And then you start going in the sub and practicing diving.
How many pilots are there?
There are 46.
46 currently or over the course of time?
Over the course of time, I'm the 46th pilot.
That's awesome. How many active pilots are there at any given time?
Oh, let's see. Right now we have, I guess, 5 active pilots. I believe there's 5 right now.
Awesome. So how does it feel to be in that line of pilots there? There's been a lot of really cool discoveries over the years.
There is a sense of legacy to it. How do you describe it? There's like a history that I feel honored to be a part of, and also just hopeful because I want to continue to uphold this legacy and do great things for the program. And so there's a little bit of like, oh, I hope I don't mess up.
So thinking about that history, can we talk a little bit about how many parts are original for a submarine that's been around since the 1960s?
So at this point, the only original part is the name. The sub goes through overhaul every 5 years, and some of those are also upgrade overhauls. So we take the sub completely apart. Some things stay the same, some things get upgraded. It all gets put completely back together. And just through the years, it's gone through design iterations and changes. So at this point, nothing's original from the 60s.
What's the oldest piece that's still on there?
I believe there's a piece of the frame that maybe dates back to the 80s. But for the most part, it's been pretty well upgraded.
What's the most interesting diving experience you've had so far as a pilot?
Going to see hydrothermal vents has to be some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen, because so much of the ocean is almost desolate. There's not a lot down there, but then you go to hydrothermal vents, which are these thriving communities that were not expected to be down there. And it's kind of wild. It's just you driving around and there's just rock, it's emptiness, and all of a sudden you come across a vent and here's all this life just centered around this one point. And it's extremely hot water. It's just looking at these things that should not be alive, and yet they're there and they're just doing their own thing. And it's so cool to see that.
So what do we know about hydrothermal vents? What are they doing down there?
So we know they're part of seafloor spreading centers. So they are part of the new rock that comes up and helps to create the crust. So the lava flows that come out are creating new rock. And this is it's a crack where water can get into it and it gets heated and it picks up minerals while it's down there. And then the hot water is ejected out into the rest of the water and it quickly cools down and all those minerals become solid once again. And it builds up the vent that has, it's got a lot of sulfur in it. And I believe there's like heavy metals in it as well. So these animals that live there need the hot water, they need the heat, but they also use the sulfur as part of their chemosynthesis process to get sugars. Which
that's interesting because like these things aren't supposed to happen in this environment, right?
Yeah. So they, like finding the hydrothermal vents is how the process of chemosynthesis was like discovered, in learning that you don't have to have like a photosynthetic primary producer to start your chain.
How long does it take to get to the bottom of the ocean?
Depends on how deep you're going. I would say what we usually descend at is a little under 40 meters a minute. So if we're going down, recently we're going down to 2,700 meters. It was about hour and a half to descend. So you're sitting in there for a bit.
What's that experience like for you?
As a pilot, it's like waiting, but with a checklist. Because every 500 meters, you're checking something, you're doing something. So you're sitting there waiting, but also staring at your depth clock as it ticks down and go, okay, now I've got to do this. Now I've got to do this. And also having some conversation with the scientists, just kind of prep work, getting ready for the dive, given time.
What was it like the first time you went down?
The very first time, I was so excited because it had been so long. I had seen the sub go in and out of the water a bunch of times, and it was just like, I'm ready to get in there. I want to be in the sub on a dive so bad. I want to do this so bad. And finally the day came, it was just like, it was so excited, and I had to like contain myself because it was still like an engineering dive. I still had to go in there and do work, and I had to keep reminding myself to pay attention to what I'm doing.
Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah. Like, oh, now I see why the scientists just always have their like faces pressed up against the windows, because it's just so cool to look out and see everything.
Right. Like when you're at the bottom, let's say, using the example of your most recent dive, how far can you see out the portholes?
You're going to depend on light visibility, but you can get, I want to say 20 feet on a good day.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's the most exciting thing that you've seen so far?
I mean, I go back to the hydrothermal vents because they're always the coolest. But I do remember on my first dive, we were in the vicinity of the vents, but driving away from them. And we just came across an enormous anemone. It had to be at least 6 feet across.
Wow.
Huge, giant thing. Just came across it, wasn't expecting it to be there, wasn't expecting it to be as big as it was. And it's just this beautiful thing, just like lightly billowing in the water. And I remember the scientist who I was with looks out the window and goes, yeah, this is the biggest one I've ever seen. But we're not here for bio, so let's move on.
Right. I've never heard of one being that big. Like I grew up near the coast, and usually there's little ones in a tide pool that you might mess with. But
no,
that's
huge.
Crazy.
And he just didn't care. He's just like, we're here for rocks. Keep driving.
It's like, I guess we saw something interesting.
Yeah.
But that's not the mission here.
That's not the mission. That's not what you're there for.
Wow. That's very cool. Thinking about the future, is there anything in particular that you're the most excited to see yourself?
To just keep going, to just keep going and keep doing it. Every place you dive in is going to be a little bit different. And each time is going to be different. So it's always just, what are you going to see this time? What's going to happen now? You never know. And there's anticipation in that. Just, you could find something brand new, incredible, newly discovered on any dive.
Special thanks to Kaitlyn Beardshear. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Podker. Please subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you like our program, share with a friend and consider leaving a review. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.